For years, they looked like the perfect love story that people could actually believe in. On television, they laughed together, teased each other, and shared the kind of natural chemistry that made viewers feel like they were watching a real marriage, not a performance. Off-screen, their life seemed just as strong. That is why the breakup of Eamonn Holmes and Ruth Langsford shocked the entire country. No one expected the couple who had been together for nearly 3 decades to suddenly fall apart. To millions of fans, they were not just presenters on a daytime show. They were proof that long-lasting love could exist in the world of fame. But behind the smiles and jokes, something had been quietly breaking for a long time. Their story began in 1996, long before they became television's favorite couple. They built a relationship that lasted 27 years, including 14 years of marriage. When they finally tied the knot in 2010 at the beautiful Everyon Hall in Hampshire, it felt like the happy ending to a love story everyone had watched grow. They had already spent years together, raised their son Jack, and built a shared career. Viewers adored seeing them host This Morning side by side because they felt genuine. Nothing about their relationship looked forced. They argued playfully, supported each other, and handled awkward, live television moments as a team. They seemed normal, relatable, and deeply connected, something rare in celebrity relationships. But perfection on the outside does not always mean happiness on the inside. In May 2024, the news broke that their marriage was over and that they were divorcing. The announcement came suddenly, without warning, and left fans stunned. There had been no public arguments, no dramatic scandals, and no obvious signs that their relationship was in trouble. For a couple who had shared so much of their lives on screen, the silence was strange. People began asking the same question again and again. What happened? Looking back, there were small clues that something was wrong. For almost 2 years before the announcement, they had rarely been seen together in public. At the time, people assumed they were simply busy with work or focusing on personal matters. No one imagined they might already be living separate lives emotionally. Both of them stayed quiet after the split, refusing to reveal details. That silence only made the situation feel more mysterious and painful for fans who had invested years in watching their relationship. What made the story even more heartbreaking was everything Ruth had been dealing with during the final years of their marriage. Eamonn had been struggling with serious health problems, including chronic back pain and mobility issues that sometimes required surgery and wheelchairs. Life behind closed doors had become difficult. Simple daily tasks were no longer easy for him, and he relied heavily on Ruth for support. She became more than a wife. She became a caregiver, helping him through pain, recovery, and the frustration of losing independence. While the public saw a respected broadcaster, she saw someone fighting physical battles every single day. Caring for a partner through illness is exhausting, both physically and emotionally. It can change the entire dynamic of a marriage. Instead of being equal partners, one person becomes dependent on the other. Ruth reportedly stood by him through surgeries, difficult recoveries, and countless bad days when even getting out of bed felt impossible. From the outside, it looked like loyalty and devotion. From the inside, it may have been overwhelming. Then came the moment that reportedly changed everything, a discovery that shattered whatever was left of their relationship. According to reports, Ruth overheard Eamonn having an intimate phone conversation with another woman while he believed he was alone in the house. The shock of that moment is hard to imagine. After years of caring for someone through illness, to suddenly hear evidence of emotional betrayal would feel like the ground disappearing beneath your feet. It was not just anger or sadness. It was humiliation, confusion, and heartbreak all at once. The situation reportedly became even more painful when she later found messages that confirmed her fears. Confrontation followed, and with it came the end of a marriage that had lasted nearly 3 decades. There was no dramatic public fight, no long explanation to the media, just a quiet collapse of something that once seemed unbreakable. For Ruth, it was not only the loss of a husband, but the loss of the future she believed they would share. While she processed the heartbreak privately, Eamonn's life began moving in a different direction. Reports soon connected him to another woman, Katie Alexander, a relationship counselor who was significantly younger than him. The irony of that detail was not lost on the public. Their connection reportedly began years earlier through social media, long before the divorce announcement. Whether it was friendship that grew into something more or something else entirely, the timeline raised uncomfortable questions. As months passed, it became clear that both of them were taking very different paths. Eamonn appeared to be building a new life, while Ruth focused on healing and rebuilding her independence. She turned to counseling, work, and family support to move forward. Instead of speaking publicly about anger or betrayal, she chose to concentrate on recovery and stability. Her strength during this time quietly reshaped public sympathy toward her. The breakup of their marriage became more than celebrity news. It became a reminder that even the strongest-looking relationships can hide silent struggles. Love that survives for decades can still break. Public happiness does not guarantee private peace. And sometimes, the end of a story reveals how complicated it truly was all along. What once looked like a fairy tale had turned into something far more human. A story about loyalty, pain, change, and the difficult process of starting over when life does not go as planned.
After the separation, the contrast between their lives became impossible to ignore. While Eamonn appeared to step into a new chapter quickly, Ruth's journey looked slower, quieter, and far more painful. For someone who had spent nearly 3 decades as part of a couple, learning to exist alone again was not just a lifestyle change, it was an emotional earthquake. Every routine, every habit, every plan for the future had been built around a shared life. Suddenly, all of that disappeared, leaving behind silence where there used to be partnership. Reports began surfacing that Eamonn had grown close to Katie Alexander, a woman more than 20 years younger than him. She worked as a relationship counselor, which added a strange layer of irony to the situation. According to sources, they had first connected years earlier through social media, long before the marriage ended. Whether their bond had always been romantic or had evolved over time remained unclear, but the public perception was harsh. To many observers, it felt as though he had moved on before the relationship was truly over. Photographs of them together at public events only intensified that impression, especially because Ruth had remained mostly silent and out of the spotlight regarding her personal pain. While Eamonn was seen attending award ceremonies and traveling, Ruth stayed focused on rebuilding herself piece by piece. She returned to work, continued appearing on television, and maintained professionalism even when questions about her personal life hovered in the background. For viewers, seeing her composed and calm was both admirable and heartbreaking. It was clear that work had become a lifeline, a place where she could feel normal again, even while everything else felt uncertain. Behind the scenes, however, life was far from easy. Ruth began attending counseling to cope with the emotional aftermath of the split. Therapy became a safe space where she could process feelings she had kept hidden for years. She later shared that it helped her find tools to manage anxiety, sadness, and fear about the future. At the beginning, she admitted, everything felt dark and overwhelming, as if she were standing at the edge of a life she did not recognize anymore. But slowly, session by session, she started to regain a sense of control. Family responsibilities also shaped her new reality. She devoted much of her time to caring for her elderly mother, who was living with Alzheimer's disease. Supporting a parent through such a condition is emotionally exhausting on its own, and doing so while healing from a divorce made the burden even heavier. Yet it also gave her a sense of purpose. Instead of focusing solely on her loss, she focused on being present for someone who needed her. In many ways, caregiving once again defined her life, but this time, it was her mother rather than her husband. Her son Jack remained a central source of comfort. At 23, he was old enough to understand the complexity of what had happened, yet young enough to still feel deeply affected by the breakup of his parents' marriage. Reports suggested that he stayed especially close to his mother during this time, offering emotional support while also dealing with his own disappointment and confusion. Divorce does not only separate two people, it reshapes an entire family. Holidays, traditions, and simple everyday moments suddenly feel different. Meanwhile, Eamonn's health challenges continued to cast a shadow over his life. Chronic pain and mobility issues had not disappeared with the end of the marriage. If anything, facing them without the same level of support may have made daily life even harder. He missed several television appearances due to health concerns, sparking worry among fans. For years, Ruth had been the person helping him navigate those struggles. Now he had to adjust to a new reality as well, even while building a new relationship. Public opinion remained divided. Some people believed he had the right to pursue happiness after the marriage ended. Others felt that the speed of his new relationship showed a lack of respect for the years they had spent together. In situations like this, truth becomes blurred by emotion. Outsiders see only fragments of the story, never the full picture of what led to the breakup. For Ruth, the process of rediscovering independence became a quiet transformation. She began spending more time with friends, going out, laughing again, and learning how to enjoy her own company. After years of prioritizing someone else's needs, she started making decisions based purely on what she wanted. That freedom felt strange at first, almost unfamiliar, but also empowering. She admitted that while she was not actively searching for another relationship, she had not closed the door on love entirely. The idea of starting over someday no longer seemed impossible, just distant. One of the most significant changes was her attitude toward being alone. Instead of seeing solitude as loneliness, she began viewing it as space to grow. She discovered that she was stronger than she had believed, capable of building a fulfilling life even without a partner. That realization marked the beginning of true healing. Moving forward did not mean forgetting the past. It meant accepting it as part of her story without letting it define her future. As months turned into a year, the shock of the breakup slowly faded into acceptance. Pain remained, but it no longer controlled every thought. She had survived the worst of it. The woman who once seemed inseparable from her husband was now standing on her own, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. And in that process, she found a new version of herself, one shaped by resilience rather than heartbreak. Their story, once about partnership, had become a story about two individuals walking separate paths. One rushed forward into a new life, while the other carefully rebuilt hers from the ground up. Neither path was easy, and neither was free from consequences. But together, they revealed something deeply human, that endings do not arrive the same way for everyone, and healing has its own unpredictable timeline. As time passed, the emotional shock of the breakup slowly transformed into something more complicated: tension within the family itself. Divorce between two people who had shared nearly 3 decades together was never going to be simple, especially when a child, extended relatives, and a public audience were all connected to their story. What hurt the most was not just the end of a marriage, but the way relationships around them began to shift and fracture. Their son Jack found himself caught in the middle of a situation he never asked for. At 23, he was navigating adulthood while also dealing with the painful reality that his parents were no longer a united front. Reports suggested that communication between him and his father had become strained, particularly during important family moments like holidays. Christmas and New Year, once times of togetherness, turned into reminders of what had been lost. It is difficult for any child, even an adult one, to watch parents drift apart, especially when loyalty and emotions pull in different directions. From Jack's perspective, the situation was layered with conflicting feelings. On one hand, he loved both parents. On the other, he had witnessed his mother's devotion during years of illness and hardship, which made the sudden collapse of the marriage harder to understand. Watching one parent suffer while the other appeared to move forward quickly created a silent emotional divide. Situations like this rarely have clear villains or heroes, but they leave lasting scars on everyone involved. Beyond the family, the public also played a powerful role in shaping the narrative. Because Eamonn and Ruth had spent so many years on television, viewers felt personally connected to them. Fans discussed the breakup as if it had happened within their own families, taking sides and forming opinions based on limited information. Social media amplified every rumor, every photograph, and every reported detail. What might have been a private separation for an ordinary couple became a national conversation. For Ruth, the attention added another layer of pressure. Healing from heartbreak is hard enough in private, but doing it under public scrutiny can feel overwhelming. Every appearance, every interview, every social media post was analyzed for hidden meaning. Yet she maintained dignity, refusing to speak negatively about her former partner in public. That restraint earned her admiration, even from people who knew nothing about her before the breakup. At the same time, practical issues like finances and property created additional conflict behind the scenes. The home they had shared for years, the place filled with memories of raising a child, celebrating milestones, and building a life, now became a symbol of division. Selling it meant letting go of the physical space where their story had unfolded. For Ruth, the idea of leaving that home reportedly felt like losing another piece of stability at a time when everything already seemed uncertain. Financial complications added stress as well. Disputes over money can turn even the most respectful separations into bitter battles, especially when careers, properties, and legal matters are involved. These negotiations often happen quietly, away from cameras, but they shape the emotional tone of the divorce process. Each decision forces both people to confront the reality that their shared life is being dismantled piece by piece. Meanwhile, Eamonn faced his own challenges. Health issues continued to affect his daily life, reminding him that personal struggles do not pause for emotional upheaval. Building a new relationship while dealing with chronic pain and mobility problems required adjustment and resilience. Although the public often focused on the romance aspect of his new chapter, the reality was likely far more complicated. Starting over later in life brings both excitement and uncertainty, especially when physical health limits independence. As months passed, rumors began circulating that Ruth was preparing to share her side of the story in a more direct way. She announced that she was writing a memoir, a book that would explore her life experiences, lessons, and personal growth. While she did not promise to reveal every detail of the breakup, the announcement alone sparked intense curiosity. People wondered whether the book would finally explain what had really happened behind closed doors, or whether it would focus more on her journey of healing. For Ruth, writing the memoir became part of her recovery process. Putting experiences into words can transform pain into understanding. It allows someone to take control of their narrative instead of letting others define it. By sharing her story on her own terms, she reclaimed a sense of power that divorce had taken away. The book was not just about the past, it was about showing that life could continue after heartbreak. The timing of the memoir suggested that she had reached a point where she felt ready to speak, not from a place of anger, but from a place of reflection. Nearly 2 years had passed since the separation announcement, enough time for the rawest wounds to begin healing. Distance often brings clarity, allowing people to see their experiences differently than they did in the immediate aftermath. For the public, anticipation grew. Supporters hoped the book would offer closure or understanding. Critics speculated about potential revelations. But regardless of what it contained, the memoir symbolized something important. Ruth was no longer defined solely by her role in a couple. She was stepping forward as an individual with her own voice, her own story, and her own future. Through all the tension, one truth became clear. The breakup was not just a single event, but a chain reaction affecting every part of their lives. Family bonds shifted, public perception changed, and personal identities evolved. The end of their marriage marked the beginning of a long process of redefining who they were without each other. In the end, the story was no longer simply about why they separated. It became a story about consequences, resilience, and the complicated reality of rebuilding life when the foundation you depended on disappears. Each of them faced that challenge in different ways, shaped by personality, circumstances, and the roles they had played in each other's lives for so many years. By the time nearly 2 years had passed since the announcement of their separation, the chaos surrounding the breakup had slowly begun to settle into something quieter: acceptance. The intense shock that once dominated headlines was replaced by a calmer understanding that their lives had permanently changed. What had started as a painful ending was gradually becoming the beginning of two completely separate futures. For Eamonn, this new chapter meant continuing to build a life that no longer revolved around the marriage that had defined him for decades. Despite ongoing health struggles, he appeared determined to focus on companionship, comfort, and stability in whatever ways he could. Starting over later in life is never easy, especially when physical challenges limit independence, but it can also bring a renewed appreciation for the present. His journey showed that even after loss and public criticism, people still search for connection and happiness in whatever form they can find it. Ruth's path, however, became a powerful example of resilience. Instead of rushing into a new relationship or making dramatic public statements, she chose a slower, more thoughtful approach to healing. Counseling, family support, and professional commitments helped her rebuild confidence piece by piece. She learned how to exist as an individual again, not as one half of a famous couple. The independence that once felt frightening began to feel liberating. Decisions were now hers alone, shaped by her needs rather than shared compromises. Caring for her mother remained an important part of her life, grounding her in responsibilities that had nothing to do with fame or heartbreak. Supporting a parent through illness requires patience and emotional strength, and in many ways it reminded her of what truly mattered. Love, after all, is not only romantic, it is also found in family bonds, friendships, and acts of care that continue even when personal life feels uncertain. Her memoir, scheduled for release in early 2026, symbolized the final step in reclaiming her narrative. Writing about her experiences allowed her to transform private pain into something meaningful, something that might help others facing similar situations. The book promised stories of lessons learned, challenges overcome, and the reality of navigating life in her 60s after a devastating breakup. It was not simply a look back at what went wrong. It was a declaration that life does not end when a marriage does. Public reaction to the entire situation gradually softened as well. Time has a way of changing how people see things. The initial urge to choose sides faded, replaced by a more balanced view that relationships are complicated and rarely fail because of one single event. Supporters of both individuals began focusing less on blame and more on wishing them peace in their separate lives. The story that once fueled gossip columns slowly turned into a quieter lesson about the unpredictability of long-term love. For their son Jack, acceptance meant adjusting to a new family reality. Instead of one shared home and unified traditions, there were now separate celebrations and evolving relationships with each parent. While painful at first, this transition also offered opportunities to build different kinds of connections. Many adult children of divorce eventually discover that love for both parents can coexist, even when the parents themselves cannot. Healing, for him, was likely a gradual process of understanding that the breakup was not his responsibility and did not erase the love within the family. What makes this story so compelling is not the drama or the rumors, but the universal truth it reflects. Long relationships shape identities. When they end, people must rediscover who they are on their own. That process can be frightening, but it can also lead to growth that would never have happened otherwise. Sometimes the end of a partnership forces individuals to confront parts of themselves they had ignored for years. Their journey also highlights how appearances can be misleading. To the public, they had seemed unshakable, a couple who would grow old together. Yet behind closed doors, struggles had been building quietly. This does not mean their love was fake. It simply means it was human. Even the strongest relationships can weaken under pressure, illness, emotional distance, or unmet needs. Love alone does not always guarantee permanence. As both of them moved forward, their lives became less about the past and more about possibility. New routines formed, new priorities emerged, and new versions of themselves began to take shape. The pain of the breakup did not disappear completely, but it no longer defined every moment. Instead, it became one chapter in much longer stories that were still being written. In the end, their separation served as a reminder that starting over is possible at any age. Life does not follow a single script, and happiness does not have an expiration date. Whether through companionship, independence, family, or personal growth, people continue searching for meaning long after the plans they once made fall apart. What once looked like the collapse of a fairy tale ultimately became something more realistic and, in its own way, more inspiring. A story about survival. Two people who shared decades together learned how to live apart. One rediscovered strength and independence, the other sought comfort in new connection. Both had to accept that the life they built together belonged to the past. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. Letting go does not erase memories or diminish what once existed. It simply makes room for whatever comes next. Even after heartbreak, betrayal, or disappointment, life continues moving forward, offering new chances to heal, to grow, and sometimes to love again in a different way.